The rain in Seoul didn't wash things clean. It just made the neon lights bleed into the asphalt, turning the streets into a kaleidoscope of slick, dangerous surfaces. Nia watched the city from the back of the blacked-out sedan, her reflection ghosting against the window. She adjusted the collar of her blazer, her fingers grazing the cold metal of the tablet clutched against her chest. To the world, Nia Soloke was a high-end contractor, a specialist in architectural fortification. To the people who could actually afford her, she was the woman who built boxes that God himself couldn't pry open. But tonight felt different. Usually, she met clients in boardrooms or at construction sites during the day. Kwon Seo-joon had insisted on the site itself, at night, alone. The car glided to a halt in front of the obsidian tower, a needle of black glass piercing the Gangnam skyline. The driver, a man with a neck as thick as a tree stump and a silence that felt practiced, opened her door. He didn't speak, just gestured toward the private elevator bay. Nia stepped out, the humidity instantly clinging to her skin, her heels clicking a sharp, rhythmic warning on the marble pavement. She wasn't easily rattled. She had hardened safe houses for warlords in Grozny and cartels in Juarez. But there was a heaviness to the air here, a static charge that made the hairs on her arms stand up. She entered the elevator, pressing her thumb against the biometric scanner. It recognized her instantly, glowing green. She was already in the system. That alone was a breach of protocol she wouldn't usually tolerate. But the wire transfer she had received that morning had been large enough to silence her professional paranoia, at least temporarily. As the elevator ascended to the 95th floor, Nia reviewed the file in her mind. Kwon Seo-joon, CEO of Hanul Logistics. But the blueprints she had been sent didn't look like the home of a logistics CEO. They looked like a fortress designed to withstand a siege. Reinforced steel framing, independent oxygen scrubbers, ballistic glass rated for .50 caliber rounds, and a Faraday cage integrated into the walls of the master suite. This wasn't a home. It was a kill box designed to keep the occupant alive while the world burned. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a space that was less a living room and more a cavern of shadows and minimalist wealth. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the sprawling city, millions of lights stretching out to the horizon, but inside, the only light came from the low, ambient strips along the floor. "You are punctual," a voice said, cutting through the silence like a razor through silk. Nia turned. Kwon Seo-joon stood near the wet bar, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. He was taller than she expected, lean but with the kind of broad shoulders that strained against the fabric of his bespoke charcoal suit. His hair was swept back, severe and dark, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones and eyes that were impossibly cold. He moved toward her with a predatory grace, stopping just outside her personal space. Nia held her ground, looking up at him. She knew she stood out in this room, her dark skin against the sterile grays and blacks of his world, her curves hidden beneath a structured coat, her eyes analyzing the exits. "Time is the one thing money can't buy, Mr. Kwon," Nia replied, her voice steady. "I don't like to waste it." Seo-joon took a sip of his drink, his gaze sweeping over her. It wasn't the look of a man undressing a woman. It was the look of a mechanic inspecting an engine, looking for flaws. "Nia Williams, the Iron Architect. They say you built the vault for the Royal Mint in passing." "They say a lot of things," she said, placing her tablet on a nearby glass table. "I'm here to audit the retrofit. You claimed the sensors on the perimeter weren't calibrating with the internal lockdown protocols. Show me." He smirked, a faint, dangerous expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Strictly business. I admire that." He set his glass down and gestured for her to follow. "The issue is in the master suite, the panic room integration." As they walked down the long, art-lined corridor, Nia couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Not just by him, but by the house itself. "You have a lot of security for a shipping magnate," she observed, glancing at a recess panel in the wall that she knew hid a thermal camera. I ship valuable things, Seo-joon murmured, walking slightly ahead of her. And valuable things attract thieves. Or enemies, Nia countered. Seo-joon stopped and turned, the motion so fluid it was almost blurring. He was close now, close enough that she could smell him. Sandalwood, expensive tobacco, and something metallic, like the smell of a gun that had just been fired. Everyone has enemies, Ms. Williams. The difference is that mine are willing to die to get to me. That is why I hired you. I need to know that when I close these doors, nothing can get in. Absolutely nothing. They entered the master suite. It was a masterpiece of paranoia masked as luxury. Nia immediately went to the control panel embedded in the wall. She tapped the screen, bringing up the schematics. Her fingers flew across the interface, running diagnostic code. Your biometrics are lagging, she muttered, focused on the work. The retinal scanner is taking 0.4 seconds too long to disengage the mag locks. In a breach situation, that's a lifetime. Fix it, he commanded softly, leaning against the doorframe, watching her hands. I can patch the software, but the hardware might need a voltage boost. I need access to the mainframe in the server room. Nia looked up, catching him staring at her. The intensity of his gaze made her breath hitch for a fraction of a second. There was a hunger there, buried deep beneath layers of discipline. The server room is downstairs, he said, checking his watch. A frown creased his forehead. He tapped an earpiece Nia hadn't noticed before. Speak. Nia went back to the screen, but her ears pricked up. The shift in Seo-joon's posture was immediate. The casual elegance vanished, replaced by the tension of a coiled spring. How many? Seo-joon asked in Korean, his voice dropping an octave. Where is the perimeter team? A pause. They are dead. Nia's fingers stopped moving. She understood enough Korean to know that dead was never a good word to hear during a site inspection. She turned around slowly. Mr. Kwon, is there a problem? Seo-joon ignored her. He was moving now, striding toward the window, looking down at the street 95 floors below. He touched the glass, then turned back to her, his face a mask of stone. We are out of time. What are you talking about? Nia grabbed her tablet. I'm leaving. If you have a situation, I'm not part of it. You cannot leave, Seo-joon said, his voice flat. Watch me. Nia marched toward the door of the suite. Nia, stop. The authority in his voice was like a physical blow. Suddenly, the ambient lights in the room turned a deep, pulsating red. A siren, low and rhythmic, began to thrum through the floorboards. The windows, those massive panoramic sheets of glass, were suddenly obscured as heavy titanium shutters began to descend from the ceiling, sealing off the view of the city. What did you do? Nia shouted, backing away as the heavy steel door to the suite slammed shut automatically, the bolts engaging with a deafening thud-thud-thud. Protocol 0, Seo-joon said, walking toward a hidden panel in the wall and pulling out a handgun. He checked the chamber and looked at her. The building is under siege. The Golden Dragon clan has breached the lobby. They cut the power to the elevators, but the backup generators are mine. Siege? Nia's heart hammered against her ribs. I'm an engineer, not a soldier. Open the door, I'll take the fire stairs. The stairwells are rigged with pressure sensors. If you open that door, the corridor is flooded with neurotoxin, Seo-joon said calmly, as if explaining the weather. He walked over to her, holstering the weapon at the small of his back. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip iron-hard. Listen to me. They are here for my head. They have brought a breaching team. If you go out there, they will not ask for your ID. They will kill you simply for being in my breathing space. You locked me in. Nia shoved his chest, but he didn't budge. You knew this was coming. I suspected, he admitted, his eyes searching hers. I needed to know the bunker held. You were the final test. I'm a person, not a stress test, Nia yelled, panic rising in her throat. She looked around. The room was now a sealed steel box. The air pressure changed as the ventilation switched to internal recycling. You are the best engineer in the world, Seo-joon said, his face inches from hers. And right now, you are the only person in this building. I can trust not to put a bullet in my back, because your survival is tied to mine." A massive explosion rocked the building. The floor beneath them shuddered violently, knocking Nia off balance. Seo-joon caught her, pulling her flush against his chest. Even through the layers of clothes, she could feel the heat of him, the hard muscle. For a second, amidst the fear, there was a spark of something else, an electric awareness of the man holding her. "They just breached the perimeter blast doors on the ground floor," Seo-joon whispered into her hair. "It will take them 20 minutes to fight past my guards to the 90th floor. Then they have to get through your systems." He pulled back slightly to look at her, his dark eyes burning with intensity. "Welcome to the war, Nia. Try to stay alive." The building groaned, a deep, structural moan that vibrated through the soles of Nia's shoes. It was the sound of steel flexing under stress, a sound she knew intimately from stress-testing bunkers in the Nevada desert, but hearing it here, suspended nearly 100 stories in the air, elicited a primal fear she had to forcibly shove down. Seo-joon released her, stepping back to the tactical table that had risen from the floor in the center of the room. The surface was alive with holographic blueprints of the tower, red dots swarming the lower levels like angry ants. "The blast took out the structural supports in the lobby," Nia said, her voice shaking slightly before she cleared her throat and engaged her professional persona. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. If they detonated C4 near the load-bearing columns, the integrity of the elevator shafts is compromised. They can't come up the main lifts. "They know that," Seo-joon replied, his eyes scanning the feeds. "They are using the service freight elevator. It has a separate power grid and reinforced hydraulics. I use it for moving heavy cargo." Nia moved to the console next to him, her fingers flying across the glass interface. "You mean bodies or weapons?" She didn't wait for an answer. "If they're in the freight shaft, I can override the brakes. I can trigger the emergency clamps and leave them stuck between floors." "Do it," Seo-joon commanded. He had shed his suit jacket, rolling up the sleeves of his white shirt to reveal forearms corded with muscle and mapped with faint, white scars. He looked less like a CEO now and more like a street fighter who had clawed his way into a tuxedo. Nia tapped into the building's management system. "Access denied," she frowned. "Someone is countering me. They have a bypass on the admin protocols." "The Golden Dragons employ hackers from the distinct cyber cells in Shenzhen," Seo-joon said, checking the magazine of his pistol before sliding it back into the holster. He moved to a wall safe, punching in a code. It hissed open, revealing a terrifying array of weaponry, assault rifles, flashbangs, and combat knives. "They are trying to lock us out of our own house." "Not on my watch," Nia muttered, her competitive streak flaring up. This was her architecture, her logic. No script kiddie from a rival clan was going to outmaneuver her in a system she had just spent 3 hours optimizing. She bypassed the GUI and went straight into the command line, typing furious strings of code. "They're using a brute force attack on the firewall. Sloppy. I'm rerouting the command signal through the sub-basement relay. I'm going to isolate the freight elevator's logic board." On the holographic map, the blue light of the freight elevator stalled at the 40th floor. "Got them," Nia breathed out. "I engaged the manual locks. They're stuck." "For now," Seo-joon said. He walked over to her, placing a heavy, matte black assault rifle on the table within her reach. Nia stared at it. "I build walls, Mr. Kwon. I don't shoot people." "Tonight you might have to do both," he said, his voice grim. He looked at the monitors. The red dots on the lower levels were moving toward the stairwells. "They have abandoned the elevator. They are coming up on foot. That gives us 20 minutes before they reach the penthouse airlock." "Why do they want you so badly?" Nia asked, turning to face him. The red emergency lighting cast sharp shadows across his face, making him look demonic yet strangely beautiful. "This isn't just business. This is hatred." Seo-joon poured himself another drink, his hand steady. "My father took this city from the Golden Dragon's previous Oyabun. He killed him in this very room. The man leading the assault downstairs is his son, Han Sol. He believes I possess a ledger, a digital key containing the locations of all their offshore accounts and blackmail material on half the politicians in Seoul. Do you have it? Seo-joon looked at her, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. It is encrypted in the DNA sequence of my koi fish in the lobby pond. Or perhaps it doesn't exist at all. It doesn't matter. Han Sol wants blood. He wants to throw me off the balcony. Nia shuddered. And me, what do I get? A sympathetic toss. Seo-joon stepped closer, invading her space again. The air between them crackled. If they breach this room, Nia, they will not be quick with you. You are the architect. You know the secrets. They will want to extract every blueprint of every safe house I own from your mind before they dispose of you. He reached out, his fingers brushing a stray curl of hair from her forehead. His touch was electric, jarring against the violence of his words. That is why we will not let them in. Nia swallowed hard, looking up into his dark eyes. She saw the killer in him, yes, but she also saw a fierce, protective resolve. It was terrifyingly attractive. My audit found a vulnerability in the ventilation system, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. The intake valves on the roof. If they can't get in through the doors, they might try to smoke us out. Gas. Seo-joon's eyes widened slightly. The scrubbers. They're rated for biologicals, but if they flood the intake with carbon monoxide or nerve agent, the filters will clog within 10 minutes. I need to reverse the airflow. Create a positive pressure seal in this room. Do it, he said. I will monitor the physical breach points. As Nia worked on the ventilation protocols, she watched Seo-joon on the periphery of her vision. He moved with the efficiency of a panther. He was dragging a heavy marble bust in front of the main suite doors, creating a choke point. He was preparing for a firefight. It was surreal. An hour ago, she was thinking about how much she could bill him for the consultation. Now, she was calculating airflow velocity to prevent them from dying of asphyxiation. Nia, Seo-joon called out, "Look at screen 4." She looked up. The feed from the 90th floor hallway showed 5 figures clad in tactical gear. They moved with precision. They weren't just thugs, they were mercenaries. They were setting up a shaped charge on the fire door leading to the penthouse vestibule. "They're faster than you said," Nia whispered. They didn't take the stairs the whole way, Seo-joon realized, his jaw tightening. They grappled up the elevator shaft once the car stalled. Impressive. That door is reinforced titanium, Nia said, analyzing the screen. But that charge, that looks like military-grade thermite plasma. It'll melt right through the hinges. Seo-joon racked the slide of his rifle. Get behind the desk. When that door blows, the concussion alone will shatter the interior glass partitions. Wait, Nia grabbed his arm. The muscle was hard as rock beneath her fingers. If they breach the vestibule, they trigger the hallway suppression system, right? The halon gas. Yes, it removes the oxygen to kill fire. It will also kill them if they don't have masks. They have masks, Nia pointed to the screen. Look at their gear. But halon is cold, extremely cold when deployed rapidly. If I override the temperature sensors and dump the entire coolant reserve from the server room into the hallway at the same time. Flash freeze, Seo-joon finished her thought, looking at her with a newfound respect. You want to turn the hallway into a cryo chamber. It won't kill them, Nia said, her mind racing. But it will shatter the polycarbonate of their visors and freeze the mechanisms of their weapons. It'll buy us time. Do it. Nia hammered the command. On the screen, the mercenaries detonated the charge. A blinding white light flared and the heavy titanium door groaned and fell inward. The men surged forward. Nia hit enter. Jets of white gas erupted from the ceiling and floor of the hallway on the screen. The mist was instant and thick. She saw the figures stumble. One man fell, his rifle slipping from frozen gloves. The camera lens frosted over, turning the screen into a blur of gray static. Thermal view, Seo-joon ordered. Nia switched the feed. Heat signatures glowed orange against the blue cold. The figures were retreating, dragging their fallen comrade. It worked, she breathed, feeling a rush of adrenaline that was almost intoxicating. You bought us 10 minutes, Seo-joon said. He turned to her, his expression intense. You are dangerous, Nia Williams. I told you, she said, her chest heaving. I designed things to be impregnable. Nothing is impregnable, Seo-joon murmured, stepping closer until his legs bumped against hers. The threat outside was paused, and in the sudden silence the tension inside the room skyrocketed. He looked at her mouth, then her eyes. Every fortress has a key. And what's the key to this one? She asked, her voice barely audible, caught in the magnetic pull between them. Me, he said softly. Before she could process the moment, the lights in the penthouse flickered and died, plunging them into total darkness. The hum of the computer fan ceased. The silence was sudden and absolute. They cut the main line, Nia whispered in the dark. Stay still, Seo-joon's voice came from right beside her ear. She felt his hand find hers in the dark, his grip firm and reassuring. Emergency power kicks in 3, 2. Red emergency lights bathed the room in a bloody glow, but the monitors didn't come back on. The holographic table remained dead. They hit the generator, Nia realized, horror dawning on her. We're blind, the electronic locks on the suite door, without power. They default to fail-safe, Seo-joon cursed, meaning they unlock to prevent entrapment during a fire. A loud click echoed from the heavy steel doors across the room. The massive bolts that had locked them in were retracting. The door was opening. The heavy steel doors swung open with a mechanical groan, revealing the smoke-filled corridor beyond. For a heartbeat, there was silence, a suspended second where the dust motes danced in the red beams of the emergency lights. Then, hell broke loose. Down, Seo-joon roared, tackling Nia behind the heavy obsidian desk he had overturned moments ago. The air instantly turned into a storm of shredding noise. Bullets hammered against the desk, chipping away shards of stone that rained down on them like black hail. The sound was deafening, a continuous, thundering roar that vibrated in Nia's teeth. She curled into a ball, covering her head, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had designed structures to withstand this kind of punishment, but she had never been inside one while it was happening. Seo-joon didn't cower. He moved with a terrifying, calculated aggression, popping up from cover to fire 2 controlled shots before ducking back down. A scream from the doorway told Nia he hadn't missed. Stay here, he ordered, his voice barely audible over the gunfire. Do not move. They're going to flank us, Nia shouted, pointing toward the reflection in the shattered glass of a display case. She could see shadows moving to the right, aiming to bypass their cover. Seo-joon cursed in Korean. He reached into his belt and pulled out a flashbang grenade. Close your eyes, cover your ears. Nia buried her face in her knees and clamped her hands over her ears. Even then, the bang was a physical punch to her chest, and the light burned red through her eyelids. Seo-joon vaulted over the desk. Nia cracked one eye open to see a blur of motion. He was a silhouette against the smoke, moving into the disoriented squad of mercenaries with a combat knife in one hand and his pistol in the other. It was brutal, efficient, and horrifying. It was a dance of death, and he was the lead. But there were too many of them. A fresh wave of men in tactical gear poured through the door, stepping over their fallen comrades. Nia, the bedroom. Go, Seo-joon shouted, firing blindly to create a wall of lead. He stumbled back, his hand clapping over his left side. He was hit. The sight of his blood, dark and slick against his white shirt, snapped Nia out of her paralysis. She wasn't a soldier, but she was an engineer, and this room was her machine. She grabbed a heavy, jagged shard of the broken marble bust from the floor. As a mercenary rounded the corner of the desk, raising his rifle towards Seo-joon, exposed back, Nia didn't think. She lunged, swinging the marble with all her weight, smashing it into the man's knee. He howled, his leg buckling. The distraction bought Seo-joon a split second. He spun, putting a bullet in the man's chest, then grabbed Nia by the waist. Move. They scrambled backward into the master suite, bullets chewing up the doorframe around them. Seo-joon slammed the heavy mahogany doors shut and threw the deadbolt, but the wood began to splinter immediately under concentrated fire. It wouldn't hold for more than 10 seconds. The panic room, Nia gasped, pulling him toward the walk-in closet. The manual override works without power, right? Yes, Seo-joon gritted out, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. Inside, now. They stumbled into the closet, pushing aside rows of designer suits to reveal the hidden seam in the wall. Seo-joon spun the heavy combination dial, mechanical, thank God, not digital. The gears clicked and the hidden door popped open. They fell inside and together they heaved the massive steel slab shut. Nia spun the internal wheel, engaging the locking pins. The sounds of the outside world, the gunfire, the shouting, the destruction, were instantly cut off, replaced by the heavy, ringing silence of the vault. It was pitch black. Lights, Seo-joon whispered, his voice strained. Emergency kit, bottom drawer. Nia fumbled in the darkness, her hands shaking. She found the drawer, her fingers wrapping around the cold plastic of a tactical flashlight. She clicked it on. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating the small, sterile space. It was lined with concrete and steel, stocked with water and rations. She swung the light to Seo-joon. He had slid down the wall and was sitting on the floor, one leg extended, his hand pressing a ruin of bloody fabric against his side. Oh my God, Nia dropped to her knees beside him. Let me see. It's a graze, he lied, his teeth gritted. Went through the fleshy part, missed the liver. You're bleeding like a stuck pig for a graze, Nia snapped, her fear transforming into a frantic, focused energy. She pulled his hand away. The wound was ugly, a tear through the oblique muscle, oozing dark blood, but he was right. It didn't look like it had hit an organ. I need to put pressure on this. Hold the light. She shrugged off her blazer, ripping the silk lining of her blouse to create a compress. Seo-joon watched her, the flashlight beam trembling slightly in his hand. The adrenaline was fatting, leaving pain in its wake, but his eyes were locked on her face. You hit that man, he murmured, sounding almost amused, with a piece of a Greek god. I was aiming for his head, Nia confessed, pressing the cloth hard against his wound. Seo-joon hissed in pain, his head falling back against the concrete wall, but he didn't pull away. You saved my life, Nia. We're even, she whispered, her hands slick with his warm blood. She secured the binding as best she could. You stood in front of a firing squad for me. The space was small, forcing an intimacy that the boardroom never could. Nia sat back on her heels, wiping her hands on her trousers, breathing hard. They were alive, trapped in a steel box, buried in a skyscraper, but alive. Seo-joon reached out, his hand, rough and calloused, cupping her cheek. The gesture was so tender it startled her more than the gunfire had. He pulled her gently closer. Nia didn't resist. The magnetic pull she had felt earlier was now a gravity she couldn't escape. Her face was inches from his. She could smell the iron tang of blood and the musk of his cologne. I told you, he whispered, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. I keep what is mine safe. Is that what I am now? Nia asked, her voice trembling, her eyes searching his dark ones. An asset, something you own. No, Seo-joon said, his gaze dropping to her lips. Assets are replaceable, you are essential. He kissed her. It wasn't a tentative movie screen kiss. It was desperate and searing, fueled by the proximity of death. It tasted of survival. Nia's hands found their way to his shoulders, gripping the fabric of his shirt, anchoring herself against him. For a moment, the war outside didn't exist. There was only the heat of his skin, the rough stubble on his jaw, and the overwhelming realization that she was falling for a monster. A dull, rhythmic thudding against the steel door broke the spell. Thud, thud, thud. Nia pulled back, breathless, her eyes wide. They found the door. They can't get in, Seo-joon said, his voice ragged but confident. It's hardened steel, bulletproof, explosion-proof. Nia stared at the door, her engineer's brain racing. Overriding the lingering heat of the kiss, she looked at the schematic etched into her memory. Explosion-proof, yes, but Seo-joon, the ventilation. What about it? I told you the integration was faulty. That's why I was here, Nia said, horror dawning on her face. The internal oxygen scrubbers aren't fully online. This room is pulling air from the master suite intake. Seo-joon stiffened, meaning they don't have to blow the door, Nia whispered, shining the light toward the small vent near the ceiling. If they figure out where the intake is, they can pump smoke, gas, or just cut the supply. We have maybe an hour of air in here before the CO2 levels knock us out. As if on cue, a faint hiss sounded from the vent. A thin, curling wisp of gray smoke began to drift down into the beam of the flashlight. They know, Seo-joon said darkly, struggling to stand up, wincing as his wound stretched. Han-sol isn't stupid. He knows he can't crack the nut, so he's going to roast the squirrel inside. We can't stay here, Nia said, standing up and scanning the small room frantically. We have to get out. Is there a back door, a maintenance hatch, anything? There is a tunnel, Seo-joon admitted, leaning heavily against the wall. Behind the supply rack. It leads to the elevator shaft we jammed earlier, but it's unfinished. A drop of 50 feet to the next service platform. 50 feet, Nia repeated. She looked at the smoke thickening in the air, then at the man bleeding beside her. She looked at his gun. Then she looked at the coil of emergency rope on the shelf. I'm an engineer, Seo-joon. I build bridges. I can get us down a shaft. She grabbed the rope and threw it over her shoulder, her expression hardening. But you're going to have to trust me, completely. Seo-joon looked at the smoke, then at her. A smirk touched his lips, returning some of the devilish charm to his pale face. Lead the way, architect. The air in the panic room had turned into a suffocating gray wool. Nia coughed, her eyes watering as she shoved the heavy metal shelving unit aside with a strength born of pure adrenaline. Behind it, a rough-hewn square hole had been cut into the concrete, dark, jagged and smelling of damp earth and stale air. It was less a tunnel and more of a wound in the building's anatomy. Go, Seo-joon rasped, pressing a handkerchief to his mouth. His face was gray, the blood loss beginning to sap the iron from his stance, but his eyes were still sharp, tracking the vent where the smoke poured in. I will cover the rear. There's no one to cover, Seo-joon, just the gas. Move. Nia didn't wait for his chivalry. She grabbed his belt and hauled him toward the opening. They crawled into the darkness. The tunnel was tight, a claustrophobic nightmare of unfinished rebar and rough cement that tore at their clothes. Nia led the way, the tactical flashlight clamped between her teeth, its beam dancing erratically over the dust-choked path. Behind her, she could hear Seo-joon's labored breathing, the wet, hitching sound that terrified her more than the mercenaries. Every few feet, he would grunt, a suppressed noise of agony as his wound scraped against the floor. Keep moving, she mumbled around the flashlight, though she was saying it as much to herself as to him. Just a little further. The tunnel ended abruptly, opening into a vast, vertical void, the service elevator shaft. Nia spat the flashlight into her hand and shone it downward. The beam was swallowed by the abyss. 50 feet below, she could see the top of the freight elevator car she had remotely jammed earlier. It sat there like a steel island in a sea of darkness. Above them, the cables disappeared into the infinite black, humming with the tension of the suspended weight. The wind here was cold, whistling through the shaft, carrying the scent of grease and ozone. Okay, Nia said, her voice echoing strangely in the hollow space. She turned to Seo-joon. He had pulled himself to the edge, leaning heavily against a steel girder, his gun still in his hand, though his grip was loose. Here's the plan. I'm going to rig a harness with the rope. We rappel down to the car roof. From there, we can access the trapdoor and get inside the cab. I can't rappel, Seo-joon admitted, looking down. My core muscles are compromised. I know, Nia said, working quickly. She was looping the high-tensile emergency rope around a structural I-beam, her fingers flying through knots she hadn't tied since her certification training. "That's why we're going tandem. I'm strapping you to me." Seo-joon managed a weak, pained smile. "Usually I buy a woman dinner first." "Shut up and come here." Nia pulled him close, ignoring the heat rising in her cheeks. She wrapped the rope around his waist and hers, creating a makeshift bosun's chair, securing them together chest to chest. The intimacy was forced, utilitarian, yet overwhelming. His head rested on her shoulder, his breath hot against her neck. She could feel the rapid, erratic beating of his heart against her own. "Wrap your legs around my waist," she commanded. "Hold on to the rope, not me. Do not let go." "I have you," he whispered. Nia kicked off the ledge. For a second there was that sickening lurch of gravity, the stomach-dropping sensation of freefall before the rope caught. The friction burned her gloves, the rope vibrating taut as it took their combined weight. They swung in the darkness, suspended 40 floors above the ground. Nia grunted, the strain on her arms immense. Seo-joon was heavy, dead weight against her, but he held on, silent despite the pain the harness must have been causing his injury. "Slow and steady," Nia muttered, feeding the rope through the carabiner. They descended in jerks. Drop, stop, drop, stop. Above them, from the tunnel opening they had just exited, a beam of light cut through the dark. Voices shouted in Korean. Gunfire erupted, the bullets pinging off the metal walls of the shaft, sparking like fireflies. "They found the tunnel," Seo-joon shouted, twisting slightly to fire 2 shots upward with his free hand. "Don't shoot the cables," Nia screamed, releasing her grip to slide faster. The rope burned her palms even through the gloves. They plummeted the last 10 feet, landing hard on the roof of the elevator car. The impact knocked the wind out of Nia. She rolled, frantically unclipping the carabiner. "Inside, now." She yanked the emergency hatch open. Seo-joon dropped through first, collapsing onto the floor of the freight elevator. Nia followed, swinging the hatch shut and locking it just as bullets hammered against the roof, denting the metal. Silence returned, save for their harsh breathing. The interior of the freight elevator was utilitarian, scuffed metal walls, flickering fluorescent lights, and crates of what Nia assumed were contraband electronics stacked in the corner. Nia scrambled to Seo-joon. He was pale, dangerously so. The bandage she had improvised was soaked through. "We are sitting ducks," Seo-joon wheezed, trying to sit up. "They will cut the cables, or drop a grenade down the hatch." "They won't cut the cables," Nia said, her mind racing as she moved to the elevator's control panel. "They want you alive, remember, or at least they want the key. If you drop 40 floors, there's no body left to interrogate." She ripped the cover off the control panel, exposing the wires. "But you're right, we can't stay here." "You jammed the brakes," Seo-joon reminded her. "Electronically, can you unjam them?" "I locked the logic board," Nia said, stripping 2 wires with her teeth. She spat out the plastic casing. "I can't reboot the system without a laptop, but this is a freight model, an older one. It has a manual gravity release for fire rescue situations." She looked at him. "I can disengage the brakes mechanically, but once I do, we fall." "Fall." "Controlled descent," she corrected, though her voice lacked conviction. "The counterweights should slow us down, but without the motor to regulate speed, we're going to hit the bottom hard. Very hard." Seo-joon looked at the ceiling as another hail of bullets struck the roof. The metal was starting to buckle. "Do it." Nia reached into the mechanism, finding the heavy iron lever painted red. She braced her feet. "Hold on to something." She yanked the lever down. With a shriek of tortured metal, the clamps released. The elevator dropped like a stone. Nia was thrown to the floor. The sensation was weightlessness, terror, and nausea all mixed into one. The car accelerated, the wind roaring outside the walls. Sparks flew from the guide rails, showering the interior in cascades of orange light. The digital floor indicator above the door was a blur of descending numbers. 30, 25, 20. "Too fast," Nia screamed. She lunged for the lever, trying to feather the brakes to slow their descent. The friction was immense. The lever vibrated so violently it numbed her arms. The screeching of the brakes became a deafening wail. Seo-joon crawled toward her, grabbing her belt, anchoring her as the car shook violently. 10-5. Brace. Nia slammed the lever back into the locked position with all her strength. The brakes bit. The car didn't stop, but it slowed violently, throwing them both against the wall. They hit the bottom of the shaft, the B3 garage level, with a bone-jarring crash. The lights exploded, raining glass down on them. The car bounced on the industrial buffer springs, groaning, before settling into a crooked, smoking silence. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nia, Seo-joon's voice was a whisper in the dark. "I'm here," she groaned, pushing a crate off her leg. She was bruised, battered, and her head was spinning, but nothing felt broken. "We're at the bottom, B3, the private garage." "My car," Seo-joon coughed. "The armored sedan, it's parked, 20 meters from the lift." Nia helped him stand. The elevator doors were bent, jammed in their tracks. Nia kicked them once, twice, until they popped off the rails enough to create a gap. They squeezed out into the cool, damp air of the underground parking garage. It was vast, dimly lit and silent. Too silent. "Wait," Nia froze. She sensed it before she saw it, a shift in the air, a shadow that didn't belong. Seo-joon sensed it too. He stiffened, raising his gun, sweeping the area. "It's a trap." Floodlights, blindingly bright, suddenly snapped on, bathing the garage in a harsh, clinical white glare. Nia shielded her eyes, squinting against the brilliance. 20 meters away, standing between them and Seo-joon's sleek black car, stood a phalanx of men. 20 of them, heavily armed. And in front of them, sitting on the hood of the armored sedan with a casual arrogance, was a young man in a white suit that was spotless amidst the grime of the night. He held a katana in one hand and an apple in the other. "Han Seoul," Seo-joon spat the name like a curse. The man in the white suit took a bite of the apple, chewed slowly, and smiled. It was a cruel, boyish smile. "Hyung Nim," he called out, his voice echoing in the concrete cavern. "You certainly took the scenic route. I was beginning to think you died in the shaft." Han Seoul hopped off the car, tossing the apple core aside. He pointed the katana at Nia. "And you brought the architect. How convenient. I was just thinking I might need someone to remodel your penthouse after I burn it down." Seo-joon stepped in front of Nia, his gun raised, though his hand was trembling from blood loss. "Let her go, Han Seoul. She is a civilian. This is between us." "A civilian who dropped an elevator on my men," Han Seoul laughed. "No, no, she is part of the game now." He snapped his fingers. The 20 men raised their assault rifles in unison. The sound of safety catches clicking off was like the ticking of a doomsday clock. "Put the gun down, Seo-joon," Han Seoul commanded, his smile vanishing. "Or I turn her into a sieve before you can blink." Seo-joon hesitated. He looked at Nia. His eyes were full of apology, full of a desperate, tragic affection. He was the wolf of Seoul, the untouchable boss, but right now, he was just a man who was about to lose the only thing that mattered. "Do it," Nia whispered to him, her mind working furiously, scanning the garage, looking for sprinklers, for fuse boxes, for anything. "Put it down." Slowly, Seo-joon lowered his weapon. He dropped it to the concrete. It clattered, the sound ringing with finality. "Good," Han Seoul beamed. "Now, bring them here. I want to bleed him slowly." As the men advanced to seize them, Nia felt the weight of the tablet still tucked into the waistband of her trousers at the small of her back. The screen was cracked, but the battery indicator was still glowing green. She remembered the schematics of the garage. She remembered what was directly underneath the floor they were standing on. The fuel reserve. She looked at Seo-joon and squeezed his hand. He looked back, and in her eyes he didn't see surrender. He saw a calculation. "Ready for one last audit," she whispered. The mercenaries closed in, their boots scuffing against the concrete, the sound echoing like the ticking of a bomb. Han-sol watched with glee, tossing his katana from hand to hand. Nia's fingers trembled slightly as they danced across the cracked screen of her tablet behind her back. The battery icon flashed red, 3%. She had one shot. "Any last words, Hyung-nim?" Han-sol sneered, stepping closer to Seo-joon, the tip of his blade hovering inches from the older man's throat. "Perhaps a prayer to our father." Seo-joon looked Han-sol in the eye, his breathing ragged but his gaze unbroken. "I pray you learn to swim." "Swim?" Han-sol frowned, confused. "Now," Nia screamed, hitting execute. Underneath the concrete floor, the high-pressure valves of the private fuel depot, stores meant to keep the fleet running for months during a siege, screamed open. Nia had bypassed the safety regulators and reversed the flow of the intake pumps. With a deafening FOOM, the manhole covers and drainage grates across the garage exploded upward. Geysers of high-octane gasoline erupted from the ground like black blood, spraying the mercenaries with blinding, stinging fuel. The sudden hydraulic pressure knocked the front line of guards off their feet. The air instantly became thick with the dizzying, toxic fumes. "My eyes!" a guard screamed, clawing at his face. Chaos reigned. The slick floor turned the garage into an ice rink of death. "Get in the car!" Nia shouted, shoving a stunned mercenary aside. She didn't run away, she ran toward the danger, toward Seo-joon's armored sedan. Seo-joon didn't need telling twice. Despite his wound, he moved with the desperation of a cornered tiger. He dove for his discarded pistol, sliding across the slick concrete. He came up firing. Bang, bang, bang. 3 mercenaries dropped, their bullets going wild as they slipped and fell. Han-sol, drenched in fuel, roared in fury. He wiped the gasoline from his eyes and charged at Seo-joon, the katana raised high. "I will gut you." Seo-joon raised his gun, but the slide locked back. Empty. He tossed the weapon aside and scrambled backward as the blade slashed the air where his chest had been a second before. Nia reached the sedan. She ripped the door open and threw herself into the driver's seat. She jammed her thumb against the ignition scanner. Access granted. The V12 engine roared to life, a beast waking up. She didn't look for the gear shift. She threw it into drive and slammed her foot on the accelerator. The car squealed, tires spinning on the slick fuel before finding traction on a dry patch. The heavy vehicle lurched forward, aiming not for the exit, but for Han-sol. Han-sol saw the headlights and froze. He dove to the right just as the 2-ton armored bumper smashed into the pillar he had been standing next to, pulverizing the concrete. The impact threw Nia against her seatbelt, but she gritted her teeth, threw the car into reverse, and spun the wheel. "Get in," she screamed through the cracked window. Seo-joon, bleeding and exhausted, used the distraction to limp toward the passenger door. He yanked it open and collapsed into the leather seat. "Drive," he gasped, "the spark, if anyone fires a gun." "I know," Nia yelled. The air was saturated with vapor. One muzzle flash, one spark from a bullet hitting metal, and the entire basement would turn into a thermobaric bomb. Han-sol was back on his feet, screaming orders at his men. "Don't shoot, you idiots, don't shoot. Use knives, block the exit." The mercenaries drew combat knives and batons, rushing the car like a swarm of angry wasps. They hammered on the reinforced glass, trying to find a way in. "Hold on," Nia said, her eyes narrowing. She wasn't just an engineer. She was a woman who had survived the night from hell, and she was done playing defense. She toggled the switch on the dashboard marked countermeasures. "Nia, no," Seo-joon started. She hit the button. An electric charge, 50,000 volts, pulsed through the outer skin of the car. The attackers surrounding the vehicle convulsed and were thrown back, collapsing onto the fuel-soaked floor. "Go, go, go," Seo-joon shouted. Nia floored it. The sedan rocketed toward the exit ramp. Han-sol stood directly in their path, his face a mask of pure hatred. He held his ground, raising the sword as if to challenge the car itself. "Move or die," Nia whispered, not lifting her foot. At the last second, self-preservation overrode Han Sol's ego. He threw himself aside, the side mirror clipping his shoulder, spinning him violently into a wall. The car hit the ramp, the suspension groaning as they flew upward, bursting out of the underground darkness and into the cool, rain-slicked streets of Seoul. Nia didn't stop. She wove through the late-night traffic, running red lights, putting miles between them and the tower. Behind them in the distance, a dull, muffled thump shook the ground. Then, a pillar of fire erupted from the ventilation shafts of the obsidian tower, painting the night sky orange. Someone back there had made a mistake. Someone had sparked a light. Seo-joon watched the flames in the side mirror, his expression unreadable. "It is done," he whispered. "The golden dragon, burned by their own greed." He turned to look at Nia. Her hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles were white. Her designer clothes were ruined, stained with grease and blood. Her hair was wild, and to him she looked like the most magnificent thing he had ever seen. "Nia," he said softly. She pulled the car over onto a quiet bridge overlooking the Han River. The adrenaline crashed, leaving her shaking. She killed the engine and rested her forehead against the steering wheel, taking deep, shuddering breaths. "Are we safe?" she asked, her voice small. Seo-joon reached over, wincing as his movement pulled at his stitches and covered her hand with his. "For tonight, yes. Han Sol is finished. His men are scattered." Nia turned to face him. The dashboard lights cast a soft blue glow on their faces. "You need a hospital." "I have a private doctor," he said, dismissing the wound. "Drive me to the safe house in Incheon." "No," Nia said firmly. "I'm driving you to the hospital, and I'm not taking no for an answer. I've had enough of your protocols for one lifetime." Seo-joon looked at her, stunned for a moment, and then he started to laugh. It was a low, raspy sound, but it was genuine. "You are bossy." "I'm the security consultant," she corrected, a tired smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "And right now, your structural integrity is compromised. I'm taking charge." Seo-joon leaned back in the seat, watching her with eyes that had lost their cold, predatory edge. "I hired you to build a wall I could hide behind," he murmured. "I didn't expect you to tear it down." "Walls are good for keeping people out, Seo-joon," Nia said softly, reaching out to gently touch the side of his face, careful of the blood. "But if you don't put in a door, you just end up building your own coffin." He leaned into her touch, closing his eyes. "Then stay," he whispered. "Stay and build the door." Nia looked out at the river, at the city lights reflecting on the dark water. She thought about her quiet life before tonight, the blueprints, the solitary dinners, the safety of being unattached. Then she looked at the man beside her, dangerous, damaged, and undeniably hers. "I'm expensive," she warned, tears pricking her eyes. Seo-joon opened his eyes, and the look he gave her was worth more than the tower burning in the distance. "I have the budget." Nia started the car, the engine purring beneath them. She put the car in gear, but before she pulled away, she leaned over and kissed him, gentle, promising, and devoid of fear. "Then let's go home," she said. As they drove off into the Seoul night, the rain finally stopped, leaving the city washed clean, ready for whatever they would build together from the ashes.